Hi, everyone. It's 4 o'clock in New York. The FBI agent who became Donald Trump's public enemy #1 in his daily campaign against the FBI was fired today. Peter Strzok, who served briefly on special counsel Robert Mueller's team, was described today by the New York Times as one of the FBI's most experienced counterintelligence agents. He landed in the president's crosshairs after it was revealed that he expressed disapproval of Donald Trump in text messages to a colleague. Many of Strzok's most widely criticized anti-Trump messages were sent in the days after Trump's war of words with the Gold Star family. It's worth noting that Strzok also criticized Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Eric Holder, among others, in text messages to the same colleague. Strzok attempted to defend himself against his harshest critics in Congress last month.
Let me be clear, unequivocally and under oath. Not once in my 26 years of defending our nation did my personal opinions impact any official action I took. This is true for the Clinton email investigation, for the investigation into Russian interference, and for every other investigation I've worked on. It is not who I am, and it is not something I would ever do.
In spite of that, Strzok was fired today in a reversal of a previous decision by the FBI to keep him on staff, according to his attorney. President Trump has already seized on Strzok's dismissal as ammunition in his latest attack on Robert Mueller's Russia investigation, tweeting this morning, quote, "Based on the fact that Strzok was in charge of the witch hunt, will it be dropped?" The firing of Strzok, an adrenaline hit to a president who desperately needs one, in that now sprawling investigation into his conduct, his family, and his campaign and White House staffs. His lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, now publicly debating himself on the question of exactly how the president will perjure himself.
I just want to be clear exactly what happened in that conversation with Comey about Michael Flynn. What exactly did President Trump say?
There was no conversation about Michael Flynn.
So you're saying that President Trump and James Comey never discussed Michael Flynn?
That is what he will testify to if he's asked that question. They already know that. So why are they asking us for him to repeat what they already know under oath?
It's a direct contradiction of Giuliani's earlier account of the very same meeting.
How is he a good witness for the president if he's saying that the president was asking him, directing him, in his words, to let the Michael Flynn investigation go?
He didn't direct him to do that. What he said to him was, can you give him a break?
Comey says he took it as direction.
There are more than a few problems with the new Trump didn't obstruct justice defense, including this important one. Jim Comey shared contemporaneous memos with colleagues about the details of the meeting and testified under oath.
This is the president speaking. I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go. Now, those are his exact words. Is that correct?
Correct.
And you wrote them here and you put them in quotes?
Correct.
So why the Hail Mary on the Comey meeting? Why lie? Our guess, because he doesn't ever plan to be interviewed face-to-face, and, well, it might be all they've got. Joining us from the Washington Post White House Bureau Chief Phil Rucker, Harry Litman, former U.S. Attorney and former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter for the Daily Beast, and with us at the table, Jason Johnson, politics editor for The Root. I have to start with you, Frank. The idea now that the obstruction of justice defense lies in Rudy saying that didn't constitute obstruction of justice because a president can't obstruct justice. That was one of the original incarnations of that defense. Is now that meeting never happened. It seems to me that a whole lot of people, including his own sitting Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who I believe testified to the fact that the room was indeed cleared and he was indeed asked to leave and he left Jim Comey and Donald Trump alone in that room together. There are a whole lot of people that can corroborate a whole lot of pieces of Jim Comey's story.
Well, the first thing that jumps out at me, Nicolle, as someone who's interviewed probably thousands of people and looked for deception, is Giuliani in response to a question of, so the meeting never occurred. Flynn was never brought up in this meeting, right? Answer, that's what the president is prepared to testify to. So that's called deception. That's not a direct response to the question. It's not that it didn't happen. It's rather that the president's going to testify to a certain set of facts that he's come up with. So my money's on the former altar boy, Jim Comey, who wrote notes right after the meeting. But this new defense that, in fact, changes almost daily is actually going more and more toward having Rudy Giuliani be a fact witness, in that he said on ABC News that the Flynn was discussed, right? And that the president asked Comey if he could give Flynn a break. So I'd like to ask Rudy first, where did you get that from? Because his credibility is shot.
And I want to ask you, Harry Litman, how all this plays into what appears to be a charade around the idea of a presidential interview. Presidential advisors and people close to the president have told me that over the dead bodies of Emmett Flood, Don McGahn, Rudy Giuliani, and the attorneys working from Florida who are the ones interacting with the special counsel's office, will Donald Trump sit for a face-to-face, in-person interview with Mueller's investigators? And here's what Rudy said to the Wall Street Journal over the weekend, I believe. Giuliani said the president is open to talking to Mr. Mueller under limited conditions, but in a new development, said Mr. Trump wouldn't sit for an interview after September 1st because that could interfere with the midterm elections. Do you think any of this is real, or is this just sideshow?
I mean, sideshow, but it's worse than a sideshow. It's a charade on a really important question. You know, what is the president saying? As Frank says, this latest account by Giuliani is preposterous. After a year, oh, but the meeting never happened. You know, it's a stunning fact. And of course, that's why you put somebody in a grand jury and get them to testify when there's another witness, credible altar boy who has contemporaneous notes. It's clear that that's the exact kind of thing that Trump could never afford to let happen. And it just underscores that the whole thing really has been, I think, a kind of political sideshow by which Trump is hoping that the political cost of not interviewing gets imposed in part on Mueller, at least with his base. He's been, I think, trying to avoid it for a year.
Betsy, Woodruff, it seems like if he had comfort in what Harry Litman just described, if he thinks that his base not caring whether or not he sits with Mueller or not, if that was all he was worried about, he wouldn't be so deranged on Twitter. There were 6 separate attacks from the President of the United States on Twitter. I believe there were 4 or more from Rudy Giuliani, with really the harshest, most biting attacks yet. We know that the special counsel's office is knitting together the president's tweets with his public statements, with the things they've learned from witnesses in and out of the White House and campaign staffs about the president's conduct, about his interactions with other witnesses, about the questions he's asked them after they've been before Robert Mueller, about his desire to fire Mueller, to fire Sessions. What do you think I don't want to use the word guardrails because it's obvious there aren't any, but what do you think the reaction is to a weekend like this with 10 tweets between the president and Rudy Giuliani, all smearing the Mueller probe?
What it shows is that as the probe has continued, the president's rhetoric and clearly the president's actual felt anxiety is dramatically escalating. We're hearing simultaneously Rudy Giuliani give a variety of different potential defenses for not sitting down for an interview with Mueller, wildly, rapidly changing goalposts as to what questions they would and wouldn't be willing to answer, when they might be willing to sit down, when they might know whether or not they're willing to sit down. Giuliani has been all over the map on all of those matters. And that really parallels the extent to which President Trump has tried to zero in on undermining the credibility of the Mueller probe. It's a project that's been underway for him since last May, when Mueller was first put in place as special counsel, but it's really reached a fever pitch in the last couple weeks. And I think it's likely only to escalate because there aren't good indications whatsoever that the Mueller probe is going to be wrapped up by September. Eventually, the question is going to be how long can this president and this White House sustain this sort of fevered emotion about an investigation that doesn't show signs of going anywhere.
Phil Rucker, you're here as both journalist extraordinaire and official presidential trigger of the weekend. You and your colleague Ashley Parker writing a piece about Don Jr. And you elicited, I think, one of the first responses from the president about his understanding of this meeting that we've seen in a long time. I want to read it and then have you talk us through your reporting around Don Jr.'s current status in the investigation. Yeah. You guys report, quote, Don has received notoriety for a brief meeting that many politicians would have taken, but most importantly, and to the best of my knowledge, nothing happened after the meeting concluded. That was a statement from the president to you and your colleagues.
Yeah, Nicolle, the most important words there might just be "to the best of my knowledge." That feels like something that clearly, others, perhaps lawyers, took a look at before the president sent us that statement for our reporting, and it seems to give himself a little bit of wiggle room, perhaps some distance from his son. Now, he's trying to make clear that he's not concerned about any legal jeopardy that Don Jr. may face, although we know from our previous reporting earlier this month that the president has been fretting to confidants, to friends, to associates that he worries about what could happen to Don Jr. because of that Trump Tower meeting. This reporting, by the way, over the weekend was in the context of a sort of interesting political thing taking shape on the midterm campaign trail, which is Donald Trump Jr. with all of this Russia baggage you think would be sort of a pariah or toxic in the midterms. And in fact, he's a really in-demand celebrity surrogate for Republican candidates. They're trying to get him out on the trail. He's going to be stepping up his campaigning this fall because he's becoming sort of a hero to the Trump base, because he's seen, thanks to his father, the president, and what he's been saying on Twitter, to be unfairly targeted by Mueller, to be unfairly attacked by the media, and so forth.
I feel like he and Arpaio have a roadshow coming. Let me ask you, Harry Litman, to weigh in on what you hear in that statement, because to me it seems a little short of a profile and paternal courage to say, to the best of my knowledge, nothing happened.
Phil is dead on. Have you ever heard Trump in all his career have that kind of caveat? It clearly was lawyered, and it's intriguing because we don't exactly know to date about the supposed aftermath of the meeting. All we've heard is that it fizzled, but obviously people on Team Trump think that there's something concrete that's going to emerge about dirts having been possibly produced. That's the reason that one assumes that Trump himself is trying to distance himself. And you're certainly right. It's not a great endorsement. And by the way, as Phil says, he's much sought after on the campaign trail, but he may well be a target. He may well be indicted soon, and he's got to think carefully about going out there and saying things that would then be clear admissions. There's no issue about Trump Jr.'s being subject to criminal process, and he might really risk things if he tries to throw red meat to the base on the campaign trail.
Frank Figliuzzi, I want to bring up something else the president's been tweeting about a lot, seemingly at his own peril. He upped the volume on his attacks on his own attorney general. Not new, but certainly the most sort of ferocious attacks on Sessions since we've learned that both the effort to get Sessions to unrecuse himself are under investigation in the obstruction inquiry, and that everything the president tweets is being stitched together with those actions behind the scenes. So here's what he tweeted. This is from the President of the United States about his own attorney general. RAG is scared stiff and missing in action. It is all starting to be revealed. Not pretty. IG report soon. Witch hunt. And then Rudy Giuliani piled on a little 1-2 here. AG Sessions should appoint an independent counsel to investigate the investigators, starting with the fraudulent Steele dossier and including Comey's leaking, perjury, and his own obstruction of justice. Time to restore justice to the Department of Justice. This Department of Justice is run by Donald Trump's appointees. What do these look like to investigators?
This is a scorched earth policy, and he's gone from calling the media the enemy of the people to now referring to the Attorney General as implying he's the enemy of the White House. But on a deeper level, Nicolle, a couple of things. First, this is going to get worse before it gets better. As we approach what is inevitably a report from Bob Mueller, you're going to see an outright assault on the Attorney General, on Rosenstein, in an attempt to get them out, or at least taint them so badly in the public's perception that they can't carry out their functions. It's going to have lasting repercussions. But on a deeper level, we're talking about assaulting the rule of law, the way we do things in a democratic society, and lashing out at your own attorney general, knowing that you're handcuffed. You can't fire him right now because of public perception. It'll backfire on you. So let's just taint him and bully him every single day. expect more of this as we get closer to a Mueller conclusion.
And expect the president, as you said, to continue to darken in his own mood. Jason, Politico reporting Manafort this, Manafort that. Trump's mood is darkened during periods when the Russia story is dominated, according to close confidants. Every day you wake up and it's Manafort this, Manafort that. It's crazy, said one close advisor. How do you get away from it? Maybe not hire Manafort, who offers to work for free and has a dirty book of business?
Yeah. Maybe that would have saved him some trouble. Yeah. I think a lot of this anger, it is Manafort. It's the Manafort trial, because this is the first. I mean, there have been some small fish that Mueller's been able to grab, some people he's gotten to flip, but Cohen and Manafort are the beginning of Trump being exposed. He can't hide from these men because they work with him very closely. He can't claim that he didn't know them when, Cohen says, I've got tapes of them. So that's where a lot of this anger comes from. And it's going to ratchet up, not just because as the investigation continues, but as we look at the possibility of Democrats retaking the House and all of this turning into an impeachment proceeding, maybe in the fall of 2019, that is what this president truly fears. He's afraid of the political consequences. You can tell from Giuliani, they apparently don't think they're going to be in any legal trouble because they come up with a new explanation every 5 minutes. But politically, he's really concerned about this.
Bill Rucker, can you just take us through, just tie this all together for us? The president, if he were comforted by the idea that they have a plan to avoid impeachment, they've got his lemmings in Congress, whatever, Nunes and Gowdy and all the guys who scream at Rosenstein without any shame. They've got this strategy to avoid conviction in the Senate, even if they should lose the House. Why are they so out of their mind? It doesn't seem that brings the president any comfort.
Well, it shouldn't bring the president any comfort, because if Democrats retake the House, Devin Nunes isn't going to be very helpful to Trump in avoiding the impeachment proceedings. And it's not just impeachment, the risk of impeachment, by the way. It's the oversight committees that are going to be presumably under Democratic leadership digging into this administration wherever they can, digging into the president's businesses, digging into the ethical conflicts and violations in the various agencies, digging into the Trump Hotel. You name it, they're going to be digging the same way that Darrell Issa, the Republican congressman, did after the midterms under Obama. And so there is some concern in the White House, but frankly, I'm not sure the president is thinking that far ahead. I think he's sort of trying to put out fires every day and keep up this offensive with Mueller and sort of survive to the next week, the week after that, and the week after that. He's more of a short-term thinker when it comes to this strategy here.
Phil Rucker, your piece made me think of the fact that the president only looks at this in terms of his own exposure. Do you think he has any awareness that he may smear Mueller to the point that he could survive impeachment, but not his staff, not his family? If they're indicted and charged, they'll be prosecuted.
Well, I think he's concerned very much so about his family. It's one of the reasons why, he's been worried to some friends about Donald Trump Jr. I think when you get outside that family circle, he's a little less concerned.
On his
clearly Bannon's on his own, I think. Omarosa's on her own. But I think, look, he's not so much worried about Paul Manafort's fate as he is about this trial playing out and what it means for him personally, for Trump, the sort of reputation, the image, the headlines, the media coverage. That's what the president's thinking about. I don't think he really is that invested in the personal stakes for a lot of his staff members.
I feel like that's the title of Michael Cohen's new book. It's you, not me. Phil Rucker, thank you for your reporting. Thank you for spending some time with us. Everyone else is sticking around. After the break, Donald Trump may have just lost his favorite punching bag at the FBI, but the FBI may have just lost one of its best assets in the ongoing war against Russian meddling. And I will tell you the weirdest thing about Omarosa being fired in the sit room. And it isn't that she recorded a conversation with Chief of Staff John Kelly while he fired her. And ever wonder what happens if you start a stopwatch and ask a senior White House counselor to name one African-American West Wing staffer? We'll show you.